My favorite oath in the game Deepwoken is Visionshaper. For a while, Visionshaper in verse 1 was actually extremely weak. But then in verse 2, it got a pretty big buff, making the clone do damage, and that's where Visionshaper started to get pretty insane. And it was very cheesy at the time, with a lot of people pairing it with things like Ice Mage builds and eventually Iron Sing builds, but they did nerf the damage of Visionshaper overall, but some people still think it's an issue. If you guys didn't know this, Visionshaper is actually supposed to be getting a rework. That's right. Dex actually said that Visionshaper will one day get a rework, and he wanted to make it a lot more tolerable. There's a lot of things he doesn't really know what he wants to do with yet, but he does know a couple things. Like, for example, he said that Mirage from the Deep, the one where you spawned a monster with your Visionshaper realm, is never coming back, but he's unsure with how realm is going to be. But I actually gave him an idea in DMs on how I think Visionshaper should play out, as somebody who's played probably Visionshaper the most out of any players. This was also based on the time that I fought Raguzer, who said that Visionshaper is actually the clone of. He still thinks that it should have the clone. So let's actually jump into what this rework would be. For starters, Visionshaper counter would be removed, but this is because Visionshaper clone would still be staying and be getting a large amount of changes. So let's actually begin with this note right here. If the Visionshaper clone is killed by your opponent early, it adds 5 seconds onto the Visionshaper clone cooldown, just to punish you for not using it correctly. Now here is a couple versions of how Visionshaper clone would work. We have the base version. It's similar to how Visionshaper clone would be right now, but it would get weaker the farther away you are from your enemy, and it would eventually despawn if you're too far away from the enemy. This is mainly because a lot of people cheese at the moment by just throwing out mantras and staying far away from your opponent and not going up close, when that's, in my opinion, how Visionshaper should be played. This version would no longer be modified by mods, and instead it would take a set amount of ether, and the base version would last 10 seconds with a 20-second cooldown, with the clone still dying in a couple of hits. Now there's the evasive / illusion variant, which was actually an idea from Raguzer, where if you get caught in true stun, you can use the Visionshaper clone to use it as a sort of substitute to take damage, similar to how Itachi would use crows for genjutsu. This move would put on a much longer cooldown of like 40 to 30 seconds. Some examples of true stun would be you getting block broken, judgment, Iron Sing's jailer talent, or you being frozen. Now there would be also a couple other variants you can use, like using a aerial variant, which summons a clone, and the clone would run up to the opponent and immediately do his critical attack, and then disappearing a few seconds later. This would have a much shorter cooldown of like 12 seconds, and the clone would die in a couple less hits. Then you have the crouching variant, which would summon a clone, and the clone would run up to the opponent and uppercut them, and if they land it, it would immediately flourish them and knock them down, giving it some combo potential as well. Of course, this would also have a lesser cooldown and would die in less hits as well. Keep in mind, they would probably also have it to where if you get hit, the clone will still die. Now we have the Visionshaper realm, and in my opinion, the best way this could probably be used in a fight. This would be based on a bar that is attached to the move, and it would be dependent on how many M1s you land while your clone is out. This way, it's very rewarding to people who can actually fight up close with their clone. The duration of how long the realm lasts would be similar to Haunted Gale, where the more bar you have, the longer it is. So probably a full bar would give you maybe like 30 seconds of realm, or like maybe half would give you 15 seconds. You'd want to be careful when you use it. Now, while in realm, every variant of clones has 5 seconds less cooldown. Clones would also do 20% more damage and have 1 extra hit before dying. You'd also get a 5% damage resistance while in it. But keep in mind, the realm has a 2-minute cooldown, so you have to be very careful again on when you want to use it. You can't just constantly spam it the moment you get some bar. Overall, this should make Visionshaper a lot less cheesy of an oath, and a lot more rewarding to people who want to M1 instead of mantra spam, because everything's pretty much dependent on it. I wanted to feel like more like puppeteer characters like Zato 1 from Guilty Gear, to where you can kind of also pick what your clone does and have a couple variants with that. So I think they could definitely flesh something out like that, but as long as Visionshaper is a lot more M1 reliant, a lot more up close reliant, and plays along in tandem with the clone, I think that'll be way better than the kind of magey stay back sort of playstyle you see a lot these days. Now, to illustrate how Visionshaper would likely be played if this rework went through like this, I'm going to go ahead and show you how I play with Visionshaper in Chon. So starting up, I'm going to be showing off the heavy Visionshaper build that I love to use. There's a lot of variety of weapons I can use here, right? Because the crits on heavy are always like usually pretty crazy in my opinion, especially stuff like First Light, which makes it a lot more interesting to play up close with. But as you can see, whenever you play up close, especially when it comes to a fast weapon, right, it can be very difficult to just maintain your clone staying alive. There's a lot of just things you have to consider, especially like your opponent giving them parry frame, which is a big like deal, and that's why I don't like loser counter right there, because it doesn't stop the opponent at all from just using a multi-attack to like basically punish you for using your clone, right? Do not use multi-attacks with the loser counter, right? Go ahead and spawn this in, right? Now usually people will just play back and like spam mantras, because guess what? Well, even then my clone is dead, but the easiest way to really play with Visionshaper is to just not engage. You're weaker by going up and risking your clone being lost, basically. which I don't really like that much, to be honest. Spawn another clone right here. Let's glare him. Nice. Actually, wow, that surprisingly didn't get rid of our clone. I don't know why it didn't. That is weird. Maybe we were like blocking when that happened. I don't know. Nice, get a clone off right there, and it immediately died due to being on fire. Another thing that I dislike about Illusory Clone, the reason why I also use Taunt on this build is because it actually increases how much my clone does, right? And nice, and that takes care of him right there. So again, just an example of how just playing close with Visionshaper is just usually just not the best way to play, and hopefully the rework would change that. Now next up, we're running it with my Flame Mage build. This is a build that you will usually see Illusory Clone a lot more often on, right? And just see how usually people just kind of spam and stay back. Don't know why my clone disappeared there, but if we really wanted to, we never have to engage with them, to be honest. There is just no reason for us to. Keep in mind though that the clone on this build is actually, it has a much longer cooldown of 30 seconds because I do have kind of like a spec variant that is kind of from a bug. Spawn another clone on him. Let's just see how long our clone can survive just by, oh, and he's already gone. Again, don't know why the clone dies so quickly nowadays. Honestly, it's just a big detriment to have a clone have a very long cooldown. So you're just better off not using any log zones or Aeon log zones. Maybe only using like 1 or 2, to be honest. Especially with how quickly it dies nowadays. We're going to do another match with the clone because on this build, bro, because the cooldown's so long and I killed that guy so quickly, like, we just didn't have any time to show off how good the clone can be, I guess, at a mid-range level. Luckily, that did not get rid of our clone right there. Let's go ahead, use a fire blade up here, and our clone is gone now. And as you can see, it is a fat cooldown of 30 seconds, man. Like, it is noticeable. Got another clone back after landing a little combo right there. Let's see if we can play around with it a little bit. Thank goodness that didn't get rid of our... Oh, and like I said, I didn't get hit. The clone has health now, and it just disappeared. I have no idea why, even though it was not maging. I just played up close and tried to work in tandem with it. And that's going to be GG right there, but like, none of that was due to Visionshaper. Now we got my dual attunement Visionshaper build, which honestly is pretty bad, I won't lie. But it's like kind of the most mage-like, I guess you could say, one of my Visionshaper builds get, because I actually don't have that many. I actually went to go look at my slots, and it turns out I actually don't have that many of them. Spawn another clone right here. All right, let's get the storm blades down. And oh, and my... I don't understand. It's like, did I get hit? You'll just lose your clone out of nowhere, and it just doesn't make sense what you lost it to. Like, you won't get hit as a player. Or your clone, it doesn't look like your clone's barely taking that much damage. I try to use clone up close, and not really cheese too much. Clone just kind of falls apart if you try playing up close because you'll get hit by chip damage or by gaze or something. Even I don't know where you just won't even know what happens when your clone disappear, and now it's on a pretty long cooldown. But in my opinion, it should have a pretty long cooldown if they do the rework. So we'll see what happens with Visionshaper. I hope Dex copes with it. If it's not that, I hope it's something a little bit more interesting. And I'll catch you guys later. All right, peace.